Good afternoon, welcome to the studio this evening and back to some more of the cottage, which as you can see currently is basking in a ray of sunshine, as it seems to be just somewhat good weather around here at the moment. Unfortunately though, it's playing about with the lighting a little bit, which I can't do much about with, because I can't shut the curtains because I've got the windows open. Anyway, Fear Reaper, good evening. Welcome to the studio. Eddie Fall Guy, also good evening. And I'm doing very well, thank you. And how are you doing, Fear Reaper? So, I think we will do a little bit more on this roof before I do some grass on the bottom, which is my way of procrastinating a little bit, because I'm not quite sure how I want to do this. Excuse me, I'm just adjusting this camera a little bit since it seems to be trying to show the top of my head. You're continuing with your 3D model. Well, I hope it's going well. I hope we get to see it at some point, but yes, I know. One of these, well, I am hoping to save up enough money to replace this camera, and I don't want Amazon Prime, so it will have to wait, because apparently they were offering a 920 for about £30 the other day. So I'm doing long strokes here rather than short ones, because it's long strands of reed that's being used. So if I do long strokes, that's more likely to resemble real thatch than little tiny scratches. That's the theory anyway. And I am hoping that the sun disappears behind a cloud shortly, because it makes it really difficult to see what's on my screens. Oh, I really hate pop-ups. Yeah, just accidentally click the top of the button on the top of this Microsoft camera, at which point it tells me that I can't take a picture because it's recording video. To which point I go, yeah, I know, and it then pops up an advert. Well, it pops up a download Skype. It's kind of like, you just said I'm recording video. Why would I want to download something whilst I'm recording video? It's like I got really annoyed. Was it lunchtime? It was either lunchtime today or lunchtime yesterday. I have an iPad. Okay, it's an iPad 1, but it's still got something like 1,000+ pixels across the top. It's a full-size screen. I can't remember what website I was on, but it insisted on giving me the mobile version. I hate websites that do that. It's kind of like, I've got a full-size desktop screen. Alright, it's portable. And you insist on giving me the mobile version just because it's Safari. and it's kind of like, alright, I don't mind that so much, except that this site didn't even have a link to the full desktop. Most of them will say, if you want the full desktop, click here, and they'll give you the full standard desktop one, but not this site. No, there's no way you could get it to give. I could get it to give me the full site, so I just gave up and went somewhere else. So that's usually my response to sites that won't let me have the choice. Don't mind it making an assumption to start with. Fair enough, ish, sort of. But when they won't let you have the choice, that's bye-bye website. Right, and the interesting thing about this is I can barely see much difference in this area here. You guys can see how that's suddenly got quite a bit brighter. I really just want to, it looked a bit sparse to me, a bit too much dark area in there, just physically, not as many scratches. So there were large sort of spaces between them, which didn't look right to me. So I just wanted to sort of start to fill in some of those areas a little bit. Now I'm not particularly after brightening up the image or anything like that for this roof. It doesn't look too bad. I suspect in lightening it now, I'm probably moving more towards it being sort of a daytime sort of look rather than a night time, but interestingly, what I am just finding with this board now is this nib is dropping into existing scratches and widening them a little bit. So I'm getting sort of fairly thick lines sometimes, which is not particularly what I was after. It's not been particularly detrimental to the piece, but if I was perhaps after trying to do something highly detailed, or where I needed to control the lines a little bit, then I guess that would be a little bit annoying to me. I don't know if it's my lack of skill or it's the board itself, something about it. Because it's almost as though in some cases the black is flaking off a little bit. Now I don't think it's a quality issue with the board as such. I think it's just the way it is, if that makes sense. I do have another manufacturer's board to try, but the other manufacturer's board is rather expensive, so it's down by the side of me, but it'll be doing 3 pussycats on there probably. Maritz, my boy, welcome to the studio this evening. Indeed you are. I've only just started, so welcome. I am just doing some work on the cottage thatch here. It looked a little bit sparse, as there was too much black in there for me, so I'm filling it in a little bit before I do something else, and I kind of feel like I'm procrastinating a little bit. I know I've got to do something about this path and grass, but I don't quite know what I want to do yet, so by doing this I put off doing that a little bit. At some point I'll have no choice, and then I'll just get on with it, but Now down here I want to go over the top of the stones, so I don't have too much of a black area showing. Drunk Raccoons, thank you very much. That's most kind of you to say so. I always like people when they give compliments and all that, but equally I like people who are able to give constructive criticism as well, if there is any. The operative word there being constructive. But if somebody can explain why it's not very good, I don't mind. Now this thatch is getting a little bit old, which is why it's sort of draping over the sides a little bit, and it looks a little bit rough. Because thatch cottages age, the roof ages, you have to replace them. I don't know, it's not a fantastic time. It's like about every 5 to 10 years, something in that sort of order, you have to replace the whole roof. One reason why, although they look very nice, I never wanted to buy one because a roof isn't cheap. Thank you very much, sir. Sorry, I have a, I always say sir, that applies equally to males and females, unless I actually know that you're one or the other, which is kind of logical, I suppose. I expect to be, yes. I'm putting it off a little bit because I'm not quite sure how I want to do that. So I am. I do need to do the roof. I'm kind of, I know I can feel that what I'm doing is using the fact that I need to do the roof at some point as an excuse not to start the path. But I've not got that much I want to do on the roof, so it's going to be a case of I will be starting on the path this evening. It's just I will say I've got to work up to the courage. It's more a case of I get to the point where I have no choice but to start, and then I'll just get on with it. Well, to be quite honest, drunk raccoons where I live, we don't have any either. I don't actually know which part of England they tend to be more prevalent in. I have seen some, and I have actually looked at buying houses, and I'm trying to think where it was. It can't be must have been in somewhere like Derbyshire or something like that, whereas I'm up in Yorkshire. Don't tend to get a lot of them sort of in Yorkshire. Thatched cottages that I recall. Slates used a lot because of it's kind of a local stone in some cases, but yeah, same sort of material. Drunk raccoons. This is china clay rather than the copper. Thistle, I suppose. Thank you very much for following me. That's really fantastic of you. Do appreciate you doing that. It's nice to know people would like to come back and see what's going on. Yeah, you can get the copper versions of this. I have some over there, which I'll try at some point. I got some copper, silver, and gold coloured. A couple of sheets or a few sheets just to try and see which I enjoyed at the moment. The china clay, the white here, is quite good fun. But I will have them to try. And you can also get like a rainbow coloured underneath, and also they call it holographic, but it's kind of like just sparkly colour. I won't like exactly what to describe it, but it's just what do they call it, a moire, like a moire fringe, just lots of colours just mingled together. The foil ones tend to be used in the kits a lot as well. I think because they can give somewhat of a more spectacular picture. But yeah, you can correct them though, Drunk Raccoons. You're right, it's a bit more effort, but I very quickly learned you can correct it. You can get black ink. Sorry, hold it a bit closer. That's black ink. So you can sort of go over whatever board it is, whether it's the copper or the white board, with that sort of area. And if you're scratching over it again, or it's in small sort of areas, it's virtually invisible. If I was to try and do half the cottage with it, then it would probably show up, but it is possible to do corrections. But as you say, it's a lot better not to need to do so. Thistle, actually, it's the other way around. This is Indian ink, so once it's dry, it doesn't re-wet, so it doesn't stay in my fingers as such. It stays as a powder. But it's actually the other way around. It's to stop skin oil off my hands getting onto the board. You can clean it off. It's fingerprints basically. You can clean it off, but it's just easier not to get it on there, because it takes a fair bit of effort with a soft cloth or something like a microfiber cloth. To get the skin oils off, to get the fingerprints off. Can't use anything too abrasive, of course, because you'll scratch the surface. So rather than, there's preventative rather than a cure, if you see what I mean. But it also makes it quite useful to just be able to brush the surface to get the black off. Yes, the glove does pick up the black then, but it's the black particles sitting in the glove fibres rather than staining them or anything like that, so they'll wash out quite happily. Yep. it was quite a clever way of the right answer just in the wrong order. This thing has now gone a little bit blunt, so I'm just going to give it a little bit of a sharpen. That's because the people who have been here a while know I'm a skinflint. I don't like to buy new tips of these when a little file like that fixes it quite happily. In fact, there's a joke that Yorkshiremen sometimes tell, and it hinges on the fact that the Scots, stereotypically, Scots are very frugal with their money. But what they say about a Yorkshireman is a stingy Scotsman. You've always been terrible with perspective drawings. They can be really hard. I mean, this one kind of isn't. There's a little bit of perspective in it at the moment, anyway, and it can be really hard to get perspective in. There's a couple of areas in here where perspective comes into play. That's the windowsill there. This one you can't really see, but there's another window here. There's a perspective angle, and just in this doorway. The rest at this moment in time there really isn't any perspective in it. It's kind of built in, but there isn't really any perspective. There will or should be a little bit with the path to make you feel that the stones are at right angles to these, so there'll be a little bit of sort of perspective in there. But perspective is can be hard to get your mind around. One of the tricks to drawing perspective often is to actually draw perspective lines into your piece. So take a pencil drawing. You can do it with Scraperboard as well, but you do it using transfer paper or very light pencil marks because you don't want it to mar the surface. Well, let's say you're doing a drawing which you can actually erase. Then you decide where your generally speaking, start by deciding where the horizon is, because usually perspective is on a horizon, and then literally you start drawing lines out. So fortunately there's three types of perspective: 1, 2 and 3 point perspective. Single point perspective is like a long road, or you're looking down an avenue, so everything comes to a point, so which is on the horizon usually. So if your horizon's about the middle of the page, where it often is, then you might decide to put your vanishing point or the perspective point slap bang in the middle. That's typically where you'd find it. Sometimes it's off to one side for some sort of aesthetic reasons, but if it's in the middle, then just draw lines out from it. And you might for example just draw 4 like this for an avenue, and then these coming down here will be, let's say, the sides of the road. And once you've got, that's the side of the road, so there's a pavement or a walkway on either side of it, so it's going to come out, and the sides of the walkway are also going to go to that same vanishing point. Let's assume it's either trees or tall buildings, so these two lines that come up here will be the tops of the trees or the tops of the buildings, assuming they're all the same height. Once you've got just those 4 lines in, for example, you've got most of your perspective, because then it becomes a little bit easier. When something's down here, you can say, well, it still has to go there, so I'm just going to draw the top like that. Then erase your lines when you finish. 2 point perspective is more or less the same thing. I'm trying to think of an example of An example of 2-point perspective is probably where you are stood at the corner of two roads at a right angle to each other. So you're looking at the corner of a building which is going off to both sides. So you've got a perspective point or a vanishing point. That's where everything comes to a single point. Let's say over here and over here. Now usually they'll be actually off the edges of your paper in this particular case, because otherwise it looks like you're looking through a very funny lens. But just for illustration, if they're on the edges here, again they're usually on the horizon, which is generally around about the middle. And so all vertical lines are always vertical, but the tops of the buildings again come, and the bottoms of the buildings or the side of the roads again go to those points. Once you've kind of got those 4 lines in again, that's most of your perspective defined for you, and it becomes a lot easier to see where things are then, because once you've got the main lines in, most people when they're drawing start to do things relative to something else. So it's a little bit further in from the edge of the building, it's a bit further up from the floor, and it's going to be parallel. You know, a windowsill is parallel to the base of the building, and so once you've got the major marks in, it becomes a lot easier to understand. 3-point perspective is interesting. A lot of the time you don't need to use it. Most of the time 1 or 2-point perspective for drawing gets you. When you start drawing geometric objects, or if you're looking, your building that I was talking about there, is you're kind of looking straight at it. If you start looking up at a building or looking down at a building that's on the corner of of 2 roads, for example, then that's when 3-point perspective starts to come in, because if you stood on the pavement looking up, then what happens is the sides of the buildings look to come to a convergence at the top, but it's exactly the same thing then, just draw the sides of the building. The building won't look vertical, it will look as though it's leaning in. But once you get those and the 2 and the sides in, once you understand that, it becomes a lot easier. So yeah, just have a play. Generally speaking, start with 1 point, it's easier. Then work to 2 and then 3. But have a play with it. Of course, if you're practicing, if it doesn't come out looking what you think, it's alright, that's why you're practicing. But what often happens is people draw what they think it should look like rather than what it actually does look like. So you start looking at a building, you know, where the roof and the floor are slanting like that, to 2 points perspective, for example, and they go, it's too steep, it can't look like that, so they don't draw it correctly. They don't follow the perspective lines. They draw what they think it should look like, and then of course it doesn't turn out like they expect it to do, because it then doesn't look like, you know, the edge of a road. It looks like the building starts to jut out, which of course it doesn't in real life, and then it kind of becomes difficult for people to envisage what it should do. Believe your perspective lines is kind of the trick of doing that, and you should have a bit less problem with it. Okay, hopefully it made sense, and I mean, I'm by no means perfect at perspective. I do have problems sometimes with it myself, doing exactly that, which is drawing things that are I'm drawing things how I think they should look like rather than what they actually do look like. Buildings are relatively easy because they're nice and square, they've got straight edges. When you start drawing, I don't know, a ball in perspective, you know, a giant ball for example, then it gets a little bit more tricky. You still follow the perspective lines, and once you kind of understand, you can do it, but it can be a little bit tricky with something that's an irregular shape. So if you're going to practice doing it something like a cube or a rectangular block, something like that, just to get you used to it before you try doing something irregular, shaped like a tree, for example, which can be quite hard to visualize exactly how that goes into the perspective thing. It does. It just takes a little bit more practice to work out exactly how, and it really becomes a case of that with a single point perspective, this side of the tree appears to be smaller than this side. So that's kind of just how you draw it. You draw it as though it's smaller on this side than that side. But it's not easy with things like organic objects. So good luck trying anyway. It's once you get the hang of it, you get it right. It really does make a difference to buildings and objects if you can draw them in some form of perspective. Even if it's something like just draw a fence line, for example, picket fence or something like that, just to get the idea of larger at the front, smaller as you get towards the vanishing point. I would say, and just to reiterate, your vanishing points don't have to be on the paper. They effectively, I'm pointing way off. I'm pointing about a foot to the right of this drawing, which you can't see. But if I push this over, if this is the edge of your paper, your vanishing point can be out here, for example, where this pen is. There's no reason why it can't at all. It's just down to the composition of the image and just where it appears to be in relation to what you're drawing. So don't think it always has to be on the paper. Sometimes that gives you a fisheye look because it's too you're seeing too much of the image crammed into the board. So you have your vanishing point out to one side, and in some cases it can be a foot, 2 feet out to the right side. Obviously that's a bit hard to draw, but just kind of imagine where it is and draw your main perspective lines to where you think it should be out there, and then you'll just carry on from there. And I was talking about obviously pencil and paper there, but the same thing applies to electronic art, Scraperboard, everything. It's the same idea. And after a while you get so that you don't need to draw the lines in, you can sort of see them in your imagination, and it makes it a bit easier then. Now one thing, and the reference image there shows an example of quite often roofs do get covered in moss and things like that, so they've got a fairly mottled surface. So the fact that this looks mottled, great. A little bit accidental, but it's great. It's a nice effect. I'm going to keep it. It's a Bob Ross moment. I seem to be referring to him quite a bit these days, but for those who might not know, Bob Ross was quite a famous painter, really, I guess. it could be said to have brought painting to the masses and making it easier, and people less afraid of it. But one of his phrases used to be the happy accident. So something that happens that you didn't intend to happen, it looks good, so you keep it and move on from there. You need I don't need a slice of bread, but I need a slice of bread. Okay. Hi, welcome, good evening. An interesting name. Were you hungry at the time when you joined Twitch? Does that refer to any particular type of bread, or just any bread in... No, okay. I need a slice of bread. Thank you very much for following. That's most kind of you. And random name. Okay. Hope you don't mind the gentle teasing there. It is an interesting name. It really is. Sometimes names like that are there because of some reason that isn't obviously known to the person that chose it, but there can be some really interesting stories behind some of the names. I'm starting to get slightly thicker lines than I'm quite happy with. I don't know whether it's this tool that's doing it. I wonder if I'm getting too much of a hook on the bottom. The different tools work differently, and sometimes it's finding the right tool. That's a bit better. The porcelain clay in these tools, I imagine they're just made out of sort of thin pressed or thin steel. The porcelain clay actually amazingly sort of wears them down quite a bit, and it had formed like a little tiny hook over, so there was quite a rough bottom, and that was obviously seemed to be making wider lines than I was happy with. Having just filed that off, it seems to be responding a lot better. Oh, thank you very much. I think a gold tip one would be even worse chosen 07. It would very quickly wear the gold off. Gold itself is really soft. Maybe something like I don't know, tungsten plate or rhodium plate, which is quite a hard metal, or even making some out of titanium, for example, which seems to be quite a hard metal. Now, I kind of made a mistake when I first did this, because what I should have done was I did this bit of the roof first before I did this bit. What I should have done, it's the other way around, because then the scrapes I've done down here in this direction should be behind this, so it means that I can't I want to get right down to this edge so that I don't get too darker an edge along there, like I haven't scraped it. But I don't really want to start and disrupt this surface here, so I'm kind of have to do little tiny small scratches in this area. If I'd done it the other way to start with, and then having done that, I could then fairly easily have just gone over that edge like in that direction, which would have just made a nice clean edge and made it look like this roof was in front of that one, which of course is what it is. So when you're in things like this, and when you're drawing as well, it's think about the order. Generally speaking, if you've got the option, start at the back and work your way forward, because things at the front are always in front of the things behind. So you can draw over the top of the something behind, and it hides it. Okay, let's hope it goes well for you then, Eddie. Is it indoors or outdoors? I don't know what the weather forecast's like for tomorrow. Okay, apparently for Yorkshire it's windy and wet. Okay, I probably want to do some more on that roof, particularly along the roof line, but I'm putting off doing this path, so I'm going to do the path. So I'm using the references to give me an idea. Ideally what I want to do is draw the path before I draw the grass, because the grass is in front of the path, so if I do little edge scratches for grass, then and they go over the stones, that's okay, they'll be in front. Okay, indoors. So let's hope it's not too hot a day then. Now then, this is kind of a perspective problem for the pathway, because you're looking down on the stones, and there is kind of like a perspective point which is way out here for the stones, which sort of, and the fact that you're looking them at an angle as opposed to straight on makes them look elongated, which is the trick to making them look like they're laid on the ground. But I'm kind of looking at it and going, can I do this? I'm being a bit chicken really. So I think the thing here is probably just a start, and we'll just see. So there's I don't know. I'm going to do. I won't say there's a step, but I'm going to kind of do a fairly large stone. So I'm being relatively light. In fact, you can sort of just see what I've done there, but I've hardly broken through the black. In fact, I probably haven't, but I have scratched it, so. I remember I need them to be sort of kind of long and thin. Otherwise, they won't. If I make them too fat, they won't look as though they're laid in the ground. They'll look like they're stood up. So for the moment, I'm doing kind of what I did with the cottage, which is just, I was about to say the light outlines. Well, they're quite strong scratches. They're quite visible to me here. I know you're hardly seeing them on screen at the moment. I'm just trying to get an idea, sort of an idea, because I still have the ability at this point to sort of work them in a slightly different way if I need to do so. Because these scratches, as I mentioned, are not deep, and I will sort of be putting like a mortar, or which is it's not mortar, I suppose it's packed dirt around them. So these scratches are sort of light enough to act as the packed dirt if I decide actually I want to put a stone in a different place. I will shortly sort of make them a lot more visible. It's really hard to be fairly random with stones. That's a fair amount of updates. I was about to say it's almost like the size of a game, but it's not these days, is it? Games are kind of like 5 or 6 gigabytes. I can remember the first, yeah, here you go, old man story. I can remember the first game I programmed on my very first computer. It was 1/4 of a kilobyte. Actually, was it? I can't remember if that included the video memory as well. Yeah, 256 bytes. Asteroids as well was the game. Not quite the level of graphics as World of Tanks, but for the time, it was quite interesting. Don't really want this to be too too wide, so we'll probably leave it at about there. Doesn't look so bad. I should put some of those in. Yeah, in fact I've still got a dedicated Pong game, 2 handheld controllers and the thing that plugs, I was about to say plugs into a television. I'm trying to think, he probably still does, but and back then it was probably about 20 or 30 pounds to buy this game. Just that's all he did, is just play Pong, and as you say, it was just a line on the other side and I think it had a line down the middle with the 2 numbers on, and you just bounced the dot around. Yeah, I remember those. Used to play it for hours and hours and hours and hours on end though. Learning how to put sort of, I would say spin on the ball, but it's kind of like get it to bounce off at a very unusual angle because of the way you were moving the paddles to hit the ball and try and confuse your opponent. Yeah, well, they had to give them all sorts of different names, obviously for trademark reasons, even back then. But it's not so long ago I gave away a PlayStation 1. My Atari, I didn't have an Atari, so the first computer I ever built, I've still got in the loft, still works. No longer has a disk drive. I'd have to find a 3.5 inch or 5.25 inch disk drive, but I've got a PlayStation 2, I've got a Dreamcast, and I've got a Wii. So a couple of old machines, but I can't bring myself to throw the old computer away. Actually, I've got an old CPM machine. I've just remembered I've got an old CPM machine in the loft. twin disk drives, no hard disk. Back then hard disks were only about 5 megabytes, and they were sort of 19 inches, well, the disks were 19 inches wide and were stacked about 8 inches tall, and that was a 5 megabyte disk pack. They were really big. Yeah, it was quite a nice machine. It was a pity it never didn't really take off. I got it specifically because my wife wanted me to play a dolphin game on it, Echo the Dolphin. She loves dolphins, so, and obviously played a few games on it, but it by the time I got it, it was on its way out, shall we say. Supposedly, well, I understand you can run Linux on the things, so they're quite a versatile machine. Well, because I used to run Windows CE, so. Now, being aware of the capability and actually doing it are two entirely different things. I never did it. To be honest, I couldn't be bothered. But there again, a long time ago I developed that, shall we say, the habit of, if I wanted something, saving up for it. So I didn't have any problem with doing that. If I couldn't afford it, I couldn't afford it. I didn't get it. So when it came to doing things like that, just didn't really interest me. In fact, I got more fascinated with things like on the PC. I think it was the PC, where one of the ways they used to stop you copying game discs was to put deliberate errors on the disc in a place that was never read. But if you tried to do a disc copy, then the sector was read. It was a nevered sector that wasn't recoverable, and therefore the disc copy would fail every time. Didn't take much to get around that sort of thing, because you just didn't bother reading that one sector. But it used to fascinate me how they did that, because with my first computer I ever built, when I added the disc controller to it, things like disc copy just wasn't available. I had to write my own, basically, disc copy, in order to be able to copy a disc. Otherwise it was the disc copy was sort of one track at a time, I think it was. So you'd have to swap discs about 25 times, 40 track. Can't remember how many tracks there were now. So you'd put it in, read a track, take it out, put your other one in, take it, and you'd be doing this for about half an hour. So I had to write my own disc copy program that basically used as much memory as it had got to copy as much of the disc as it could before you put the other one in. So you could do it in 3 swaps rather than about 50. has a boot disc and a spring to hold the door sensor. Okay. I sort of find it an interesting intellectual exercise, working out how they've done these things rather than trying to circumvent them as such. And I think, what was it, the PS1 used an infrared laser, so they had a black coating on the CDs, so they couldn't be read by a standard disk drive at the CD drive at the time. Of course, these days those techniques all go out the window because it's all download stuff. And you still can't beat the boot speed of something like one of the Ataris with a cartridge, a hard cartridge in it. Well, I was kind of procrastinating in starting this path, but I've done it. It sort of looks pathish like. And that may not be English, but it'll do for what I was meaning. Now these, I don't mind being, they're looking really light and bright. I don't mind that, of course. They're flat. They're pointing straight up at the sky and whatever the light source is, so they obviously get walked on a lot as well, which will tend to polish them and make them lighter and reflective, so them being quite a bit lighter than anything else is acceptable. And of course, if it wasn't, I'd probably make up a different story that made it sound acceptable. So one of the tricks of artist in residence is the story is yours. You know, it's you can make it whatever you want it to be. I haven't thought of a name for this piece yet. I do like to give things a name which is somewhat evocative of the piece itself. I haven't really considered what it might be for a thatched cottage, but if anybody's got any interesting ideas for a name and why it's a good name, then feel free to let me know. And of course they won't be perfectly flat, so some of the areas that show up, well, they're not necessarily showing up too well on there, but that show up sort of brighter dots and things like that is okay, because the stones are, whilst they've been walked on a lot, so they'll be quite smooth, they still will have all sorts of textures. I thought they were actually brighter than they look on screen, so might have to go back over them again and brighten them up. Fly GG, welcome to the studio this evening, and AD is correct there. That's exactly why I'm wearing the gloves. It stops fingerprints and finger oil getting onto the board. They will rub off. This board, doesn't. It will absorb moisture, but the ink doesn't come off when they get wet, or get skin oils on. So it can just be polished off, but it's easier not to get them on in the first place. I am thinking, we'll see how it goes. I might have to put a light on in a little bit. Now in this particular case, while I'm doing these stones, I'm doing the scratching all in one direction, rather than in sort of random directions as I did with the walls of the cottage. The reason why I'm doing that is because it feels to me, and I'm learning this, that if I do them all in that sort of flat direction, it will make them look thinner in the across direction, and it appears to me to give them a look which is more in keeping with them being, the flat path, than if I'd done them in random directions. It feels like if I'd done them in random directions, they'd look less like a path and sort of still look a bit odd. That's the reason why I'm doing them all in one direction. Whether it's right, I don't know. Whether it looks good, we'll find out when I've finished. So I'm learning quite a bit about doing things like this as I go along. This is the first ever building I've done in Scraperboard. I've done exactly 2 pieces. This is my third. The first one was a portrait of a singer on stage, a gentleman called John Miles, if you've ever heard of him. And the second one was my version of Earthrise, which is a photograph which was taken on the moon of the Earth rising above the moon's horizon, sort of the reverse to moonrise on Earth. And that was my second piece. I haven't quite finished it yet, but substantially that's finished. May do a bit more on it once I decide that this particular cottage is done. And this is the third piece. So none of them are like each other, so learning a lot about how to do something as I go along. learning a few interesting techniques, like if you use a pencil when you're drawing, one of the tricks of using a pencil is to keep rotating it, especially if you can rotate it while you're drawing lines. Keeps the pencil point sharp doing that. Kind of doing the same thing with this. I keep turning it one way or the other, and it's keeping the point sharp. Kind of something I've learnt in doing this particular piece. For some reason I didn't notice it on doing the other two. That almost made me jump. Flight GG, thank you very much for following. I do appreciate you doing that. As I said before, it's nice to know when people would like to come back. It's quite encouraging to carry on doing things. Thank you very much. If there's anybody watching that does their own art as well, feel free to mention it. I'm interested in all sorts of things, and what other forms of art and material and things people use. So feel free to mention it if you want, and if you stream art and stuff, let me know. I do. I very rarely watch anything other than creative streams these days. So when I'm not streaming, I'm usually to be found somewhere in creative. That's when I'm not asleep, if you know what I mean. When I could look at streams, and watching some creative stream or other. I do tend to prefer to watch people who are either doing physical art and crafts, or who are explaining what they're doing whilst they do it, so that I get to learn something. Yeah, so quite a few of the streamers that I used to watch before I discovered creative have kind of lost out a little bit. I don't think they'll have noticed them. At least 2 or 3 of them were sort of 10,000 plus followers. So but for me, these days, games just can't compete with real arts and crafts. Once I've put the stones in, I'll then go and fill in around them in like a grey sort of, I'll call it colour, but it's sort of just lots of thin lines, so it appears to be grey, to form sort of the filled in path. And then there'll be some grass down here, which will be lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of little tiny vertical strokes. Actually, if I had something like a small wire brush, then I could use that for creating the grass, but I don't actually have one. Well, sorry, that's not true. I do have one, but I don't want to contaminate it because I need to use it for soldering aluminium, and that's really finicky with brushes, with contaminated wire brushes. It stops it working very much. That looks on stream. That doesn't look too much like a path. It looks more like it here in person. Maximus 752. My sense of humour just kicks in because I was about to say you might be, but I'm not. It's quite warm here in the studio, but I know you're referring to the artwork, so thank you very much. It's actually not too bad. It's only 24 degrees in the studio at the moment, which is quite unusual. It's usually a bit warmer than that. Really hard to do random shapes. Trenta, good evening. Welcome to the studio. Your draw is insane. I'm assuming I'm an old man, so I'm assuming that's a good comment. Because it seems to be that these days the words often seem to mean the opposite to what they sound. Thank you, Trent. Thank you. Ah dear. So, as I say, I'm an old man. I'm not up on the latest language, you see. So I kind of I've got used to the sick being good. I don't know. I mean, to me, being sick is bad, but I hate being physically sick. So no, it's not. It's not your bad English, none at all. It's I'm sure your English is better than my version of your native language. He says, because I'm not quite sure what it would be in Switzerland, but welcome from Switzerland. And don't worry about bad English. As I say, yours possibly is better than my English sometimes anyway. So I'm trying really hard not to be too predictable in the placing of the stones on the path, which is really hard. And also not to make them all look identical to each other, so they're a fairly random shape. Humans are quite bad at being random. Find it easier if this was a lot of bits of broken stone and you to lay them down in a path, you'd be able to do that, fitting them in between each other and things like that, and it would come out looking quite random. But when those random shapes aren't forced on you, it's kind of like draw what you've just done physically. You find yourself not being able to create those random shapes and random placements that come from trying to fit stones together. It's quite odd. What type of paper am I using? It's not paper actually. It has various names. It gets called and I've just realised you probably didn't mean paper as in paper, but I'll answer what I think you meant anyway. It has various names: Scraperboard, Scratchboard, Scraperboard, all along those sorts of lines: scratch, scrape, and board, paper, scratch paper, scraperboard, scraper paper. So what this is it's a sandwich of 3 different materials. There's a backing of some kind. For this particular manufacturer, the backing, I'm going to show you, it's quite thin. As you can see, it's only about a couple of millimeters thick. So for this manufacturer, the backing is thin card. For others, it's quite thick wood. What then happens is there's a layer of porcelain clay spread over the top of that backing and made really flat. And then finally, once that's dried, a layer of black Indian ink is placed over the top. And then that's a blank board. You then use anything that's sharp to scratch through or scratch off the Indian ink to leave the white showing from underneath. So this is a particular I'll call it a specialist tool, but it's a tool which is sold for doing the job. But you can use a paper clip, file, sandpaper, scalpel, pin, anything basically that's sharp enough just to scratch through the surface of the Indian ink. It's reasonably, I'll say it's reasonably tough, because even with this I can scratch and not make much of a mark, and I'm not avoiding this, but I am doing it using a bit of it that's not particularly sharp. If I turn it over and use the other side, you might see the difference. It immediately shows white. They also do versions of this board where instead of using porcelain clay, they'll use something like gold foil or silver foil or copper coloured foil. So that instead of getting white when you scratch it, you'll get gold, silver, copper. So you get different. You can get a different look to the image, and certainly with where they've used porcelain clay, there are inks that you can use to put over the top of it that will apply colour, and I'll probably do that in this area down here. When I put grass in, I've got some green ink that I'll try and make green, and we'll see what happens. Yeah, sorry, the other thing I was going to say is they do sometimes, or you can get this board where the board they don't put the Indian ink over the top, they just leave it white, and that then allows the artist to take the black ink and draw, because you can use a pen, or you know, like a fountain pen, or a pen, you know, quilt pen type idea, or you can use a small paintbrush to put an image of, you know, using black or coloured inks on top of the white clay, because it holds a really nice image doing that. And then if it suits the image, you can then apply scratch marks through the ink that you've put on to reveal some of the white, so you can mix and match. So there is I haven't got any of the white, but it's an interesting different way of using the same media. Oh yeah. Oh, you heard the iPad. I didn't. I kind of half ignore it these days, but yes, 9:30 it'll be Matt. Okay, how do you know to draw so good? I don't actually know the answer to that one, Trenta. Practice is a lot of it, and I am learning not to be afraid to try something. I think in the past I've had problems on not wanting to start something because I didn't think I could finish it, and I am sort of learning that if I don't start, I never will finish it, and I am learning things like not to worry about, if I'm not sure how to do something, not to worry about it, do what I do know how to do, and then come back to the bits that I don't, because by then I might have learnt something, or I'll just try something and see if it works. I kind of started this evening that way. I didn't really know how to do the path, didn't really want to do it. I kind of was finding excuses to do something else in the artwork, which I did, but ultimately I had to come back and start the paths. So and streaming means I've got to get on and do it, but it really is just practice. Okay, Eddie, have a good evening and good luck tomorrow. So I think the other thing that helps me is that I like creating things, Trenta. So I like wanting what I'm trying to do. Xerxes, I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. No, there isn't. Not quite sure what you're looking at to be able to see behind me. All I can see is the chair of my wall. So you look. This camera is looking up towards the corner of the ceiling. If you're seeing this here, well, this is the main camera that you're looking at. Unfortunately, yeah, I guess it must be. I can't actually see anything that would resemble a dog up there. It's a blue ceiling with a yellow wall, and there you can just see a light fixture. In fact, actually, talking of light, I'm just going to put some lights on. So I'm just going to disappear off camera a moment. Getting a little bit dark in here. But Xerxes pattern recognition, though, is an interesting thing that humans do. They can see something in random sort of shapes and patterns. My walls, which you can't actually see on the camera, but my walls are sponged paint, which is basically random splotches of paint, and it's amazing as you look through it. You can see all sorts of things in the splodges. Quite often you can see a face, or maybe a pussycat, or a dog, or something like that in just the markings on the paint. It's quite fascinating what you can see, and they weren't put there. I did it, so I know it was just tapping with a sponge. So no real shapes were put into it. But it's an amazing thing how your eyes and your brains pick out things like that. Probably why it's quite difficult to be random about things like I'm trying to do here, is because no matter how random you try to be, your eye keeps picking out a pattern and you want to keep conforming to the pattern. Like, for some reason I seem to have always put 3 stones across. Can't do anything about it, but I'll maybe sneak an extra one in somewhere. But then there'll be 4 stones across in a particular, and it'll look like a V or something. Toss underscore. and discovering something. Let me give you a word of advice, Dos. Ask permission before you post links. You can easily get banned by bots. And Xerxes, I believe it was there. Thank you very much for the follow. I did almost missed it, but luckily I get a second repeat and it's on another screen. So thank you very much for following. That's really really kind of you. Thank you very much. And I don't tend to no, I'm just, you know, luckily I kind of recognize what links are, but Imgur links is one that I don't tend to want to click on because you can have all sorts of pictures on there. So what's Xart? Or cross art? Is it? Oh, okay. In that case, it's not the something that I would particularly be interested in, I'm afraid. I'm sure other people might be, but it's not something I particularly find that fascinating. But I hope you enjoy doing it, whatever it is. Art is art, and different people see art in different things. And since it's not an area which particularly interests me, I'm not particularly qualified to make comment on it. But yeah, no. Well, in that case, congratulations. If you sold anything for 10k, that isn't bad. But so yes, I'd certainly be proud of selling an image for that amount of money. Yeah, people are different. It's not a problem. Yeah, it's a little bit predictable, is that path, but it's getting there. Probably do some in this area around here. That is, if I put some more of the stones closer together, and around here, then maybe I can stop it looking quite. At the moment, it's kind of like, as I mentioned earlier, 3 stones across, 3 stones across. So I'm going to try and put some a bit closer together. I'll maybe do is insert a few extra ones around here as well. So I suddenly start putting them really close together around here, it will look suspiciously. It looks suspicious as to why all of a sudden there's a lot more rocks closer together. So I'll maybe sort of space a few out just to ease into a slightly more wider space configuration as it moves away. Well, thank you for the offer, but no, it's not something I'm interested in, Toss. Thank you very much, but thank you for asking, and no, I'm not offended. Doesn't as you say, their sexual act doesn't offend me. It's just different, and it's people find an unmade bed to be art. Other people find it offensive. I don't see the point. I don't see what it says. I guess the other famous one in the of course is the pile of bricks. Some people find that to be art. Some people can't understand why, when it was just dropped out of a wheelbarrow, how that becomes art just because you've dropped it out of a wheelbarrow. And can't quite understand why somebody would want to pay the sort of money that they do, but they do. So, no problem. I mean, I'm certain that people would look at this and go, why on earth would you want to do that? If we were all the same, we probably wouldn't have things like art. I'm getting bored with trying stones. I kind of wish I could just end it there. Well, thank you for that, Toss. I hope I can be at times. Other times I'm not quite so nice, but yeah. It's really especially in art terms, it's different people like different things, so I don't see any point in getting all shook up about it. It's about an hour and I'm starting to get a little bit bored with this. That if I'm not careful, I start trying to rush it. So I've got to make sure I sort of go, you know what, I'm getting bored with this, then maybe I'll just try something different and come back to it later. Or that's one thing when you, whatever form of art you're doing, if you can recognise that you're rushing something because you want to finish it rather than, well, you know, that you're rushing it basically because for whatever reason, and sort of go, you know what, it's, you know, if I want to do some nice art, then rushing it's the wrong thing to do, and maybe the right thing to do is just to walk away for a while, maybe come back in an hour, maybe come back in a couple of days, or maybe, you know, you never come back to the piece at all, but at least you don't sort of rush something, finish it, and then go to yourself, you know what, I really wish I hadn't done whatever it was. It's perfectly alright not to finish something. And actually sometimes an unfinished artwork is art in its own right as well. I mean, I'm not about to do this, but as an illustration, the fact that you can see I've just outlined these stones here, that could be something I just decide, you know what, I'm leaving that like that. I think that's part of the artwork, and you know, you go on from there. Just adding a few more in, just around the place, just to sort of the fact that I've got more in a smaller space here. I just want to add a few in, and I probably will add a few more in as well, just so, as I say, it doesn't look like I've suddenly gone from a real lot to, you know, a real sparse path. Right, well, it's 10 o'clock tonight. I think, as I mentioned, I was getting slightly a bit bored with doing the paths, so I think it's probably time to call it a night on this one for this evening. So we've done some more work on the thatch. Probably wants a little bit more done on it again, perhaps. I think perhaps I need to make it a little bit brighter just above these walls here. That way it'll make the wall look a little bit dimmer, as though it's in shadow a little bit. The contrast, I would like a little bit more contrast, so I'll probably lighten up around the edges there, but otherwise that's not too bad. And then the path, to me that path, and it doesn't look on the screen, but to me that path looks horizontal. In person here, I'm sort of getting mixed messages when I look at the screen, that, you know, as you guys see it there. Sometimes it looks horizontal, sometimes it looks sort of vertical a little bit. I'm hoping when we get some more of the surrounding, like the grass around here, and maybe, I don't know, something in that area. Not quite sure what to do there, maybe a bit of long grass or something. Then it will look more horizontal. Because if it doesn't, I'm not quite sure what I'll do about it, but we'll find out when it happens. So that's kind of it for today. So tomorrow, do some more of the path, put some grass in, and ground the cottage, and then whether we'll use the green ink tomorrow, I'm not sure. Might do. There's maybe enough, maybe get that far to do that. I haven't decided yet whether to put grass on the sides of the cottage here, because if there's grass out front, grass around the back, so you'd see some of that at least towards the horizon, and probably on this side as well, but I'm not quite sure. But relatively speaking, not too far from finishing it now. I know I do need to do some more work just around this ridge line. They're much too dim. Are those decorations? That should be quite a bit brighter, so we'll deal with that as well. So what I'm going to do now is say thank you everybody that's been watching. If there's anybody watching that isn't following, then of course I would appreciate you doing that. That's if you would like to come back and see more. And in theory, Twitch will do that for you, notify you. On the other hand, you might prefer to be notified by Twitter, as I do tweet when I go live, not when I have my breakfast. The only tweets I do send are art related or related to the stream itself, so you are relatively safe from tweets from me. On the other hand, if you just like to try and catch the next stream, next scheduled stream is tomorrow evening 8 PM in the UK, 1900 hours GMT, or that time 8 PM in the UK would be 2 hours ago. Whatever time zone you're in, 2 hours ago is 8 PM, but that time tomorrow night, my scheduled stream 7 nights a weekish is from 8 PM. There may be a bonus one tomorrow afternoon. If there is, it will be in about 17 hours. Something like that, 3 PM in the UK. But I'm not sure. That's just down to individually at the time whether I'm available to do any streaming or not. And what I actually do on that stream, we find out when I do it. I don't even know myself if I do that. But anyway, guys, thank you very much for an enjoyable evening, and I hope to see you again on a future stream. Bye bye.